By the summer, Graham Whitmore stopped saying our beach house. Eleanor had already begun to understand that something was wrong, although she did not yet know how much of her life had already been rearranged without her permission. The house stood at the eastern edge of Montauk, where the road narrowed and the dunes rose in pale, wind-blown ridges between the houses and the Atlantic. Eleanor had bought it 11 years earlier with the inheritance her mother left her, 3 months before she married Graham. At the time, the house was little more than weathered cedar, cracked windows, and a kitchen with yellow cabinets that looked as though they had survived several hurricanes. Eleanor had loved it immediately. "It has good bones," she had told Graham on their first weekend there. He had laughed and pulled her against him. "You say that about everything." "Not everything," she had answered. "Just the things I want to save." For years, they had spent long weekends there, carrying groceries from the little market on Main Street, drinking coffee barefoot on the deck, and watching storms roll across the water. There had been birthdays, Thanksgiving leftovers, arguments that ended in apologies, and one unforgettable night, when Graham had proposed to her again after 12 years of marriage because he said he had realized he had stopped telling her how lucky he was. Eleanor remembered that night whenever she wanted to believe they were still the people they had once been. By September, however, Graham had begun coming home later. His suits smelled faintly of hotel soap and expensive restaurants, and his phone seemed to have become a second pulse beneath his palm. One evening in their Manhattan kitchen, Eleanor watched him turn his screen face down when she entered. "Who was that?" she asked. "Nobody." "Nobody texts you at 11:30? Graham opened the refrigerator and stared inside as though the answer might be hidden behind the wine. "It was work." Eleanor leaned against the counter. "You work in private equity, Graham. Everyone you know seems to work until midnight." He smiled without looking at her. "Exactly." She noticed the smile because it did not reach his eyes. "Are you happy?" she asked. He finally looked at her. "What kind of question is that?" "A simple one, yes." "You answered too quickly." His jaw tightened. "Maybe because I don't want every conversation with my wife to feel like an interview." The words landed harder than he intended, and for a moment both of them stood still. Eleanor looked at the wedding photograph hanging beside the dining room doorway. They were younger in it, sunburned from a trip to California, laughing at something outside the frame. "I don't want an interview," she said quietly. "I want to know where you are." Graham picked up his phone. "I'm here." But the next morning he left before she woke. 3 weeks later, Eleanor found the receipt. It was tucked inside the pocket of a navy blazer she had sent to the cleaners. The restaurant was called Lark, a small place in Tribeca where reservations were nearly impossible to get. "Dinner for 2. Champagne." A handwritten note beneath the printed receipt. Sloane 900. Eleanor stared at the name until the letters lost their shape. She knew Sloane Mercer. Everyone in Graham's professional circle seemed to know her. 32, elegant, relentlessly composed, the communications director for a luxury development company that had recently become one of Graham's firm's clients. Eleanor had seen her in photographs online, always wearing cream-colored dresses, always standing slightly behind someone important, always smiling as though she already knew the outcome of every conversation. Eleanor did not confront Graham that night. She waited until Sunday morning. "Who is Sloane Mercer?" Graham stopped buttering his toast. It was a tiny movement, barely visible, but Eleanor saw the knife freeze halfway across the plate. "Why?" "Because I found a dinner receipt." "You went through my jacket?" "The jacket went to the cleaners." "So you were looking for something?" "No. I was looking at a receipt." Graham sighed. "Sloane is a client." Eleanor watched his face. "Clients usually don't get champagne at 9 on a Friday night." "Sometimes they do." "Do you sleep with your clients?" The silence that followed was answer enough. Graham looked down. Eleanor felt something inside her go very still. "How long?" she whispered. "Eleanor, how long? It wasn't supposed to happen." She laughed once, softly, because the sentence was so ordinary. "That's what people say when they know exactly what they did." Graham stood. "It wasn't just physical." Her face changed. He saw it and immediately regretted the words, but they were already between them. "You love her?" Eleanor asked. "I don't know." "But you love me?" He said nothing. That was the moment the marriage truly broke. Not when he cheated. Not when she found the receipt. It broke when Eleanor asked him to name what remained, and Graham could not. 2 days later, he told her he needed time. A week after that, he told her he was going to Montauk. Alone? Eleanor asked. He hesitated. I need somewhere quiet. She studied him across the marble kitchen island. You're taking Sloane, Eleanor. You're taking her to my house. Our house. No, she said. You haven't called it that in 11 years. He stared at her. She understood then that something had already been decided without her. Graham picked up his keys. I don't want to fight. Neither do I. Then let me go. Eleanor watched him walk toward the door. Graham. He stopped. What? If you go there with her, don't expect me to pretend this is a separation between husband and wife. He turned slowly. What is it, then? Eleanor looked at the man she had once trusted with every vulnerable part of herself. It's you choosing another life. He opened the door. Cold air from the hallway slipped inside. Maybe I need to find out if it's the right one. The door closed. Eleanor remained in the kitchen for several minutes, listening to the refrigerator hum. Then her phone buzzed. A notification from Instagram. Sloane Mercer had posted a photograph. The Atlantic stretched behind her in a silver-blue horizon. Graham's shoulder appeared at the edge of the frame. The caption read, Sometimes life begins when you finally stop being afraid of what comes next. Eleanor stared at the screen. Then she looked toward the window, where Manhattan's towers reflected the late afternoon sun like polished knives. For the first time in 11 years, she did not wonder how to save what they had built. She wondered what, exactly, still belonged to her. The following Friday, Eleanor drove to Montauk without telling Graham she was coming. She did not go because she wanted to catch him. She went because there are moments in a marriage when suspicion becomes unbearable precisely because it leaves too much room for mercy. Eleanor wanted one last chance to discover that she had misunderstood him. The drive from Manhattan was gray and uneventful, the kind of late summer afternoon when the city seemed to loosen its grip slowly, mile by mile. She passed farm stands, gas stations, beach traffic, and the occasional SUV packed with children and coolers. On the passenger seat lay a folder containing property records, insurance papers, and the original closing statement from 11 years earlier. She had no reason to bring it. She told herself it was habit. The truth was less comfortable. Somewhere beneath her grief, something had begun keeping score. The beach house appeared exactly as it always had from the road, cedar siding silvered by salt, white hydrangeas bending beneath the wind, the narrow path leading toward the ocean. Eleanor slowed before turning into the driveway. There was a new black Mercedes parked beside the garage. Not Graham's. She stopped the car across the street and stared at it. A white linen robe hung from the second-floor balcony railing. A pair of women's sandals sat beside the front door. Someone had placed 2 Adirondack chairs facing the ocean, each with a wineglass resting on its arm. For several seconds, Eleanor simply sat behind the wheel. Then she heard laughter. She got out. The front door opened before she reached the porch. Graham stood there wearing jeans and a pale blue shirt she had bought him in Nantucket 3 summers earlier. Behind him, Sloane appeared with a glass of white wine in her hand. Neither woman moved. Sloane's expression changed first. Eleanor. Eleanor looked at Graham. You brought her here. Graham stepped outside and quietly closed the door behind him. I told you I needed space. You didn't tell me you were moving her into my house. Our house, he said. She looked past him through the glass. There were flowers on the dining table. Fresh flowers. Eleanor had never bought flowers for that table because she liked the view too much and thought nothing should compete with it. Don't, Graham said. Don't what? Make this uglier than it already is. Eleanor gave him a small, almost incredulous smile. You brought your mistress into the one place I never had to question whether I belonged. Sloane stepped forward. I think you should hear Graham out. Eleanor turned toward her. I don't think you understand the position you're in. Sloane's face tightened. I understand that your marriage was already broken. No, Eleanor said. You understand the version of my marriage Graham told you about. Graham's voice sharpened. That's enough. No, Eleanor replied. It isn't. She walked past him into the house. Everything was familiar and unfamiliar at once. The blue sofa she had chosen. The framed photographs from their trips. The brass lamp her father had given them, and yet there were traces of Sloane everywhere. A pink cosmetic bag sat on the bathroom counter. Her perfume lingered in the hallway. A pair of expensive sunglasses rested beside Eleanor's old ceramic bowl. On the refrigerator was a photograph of Graham and Sloane at the beach. Eleanor reached up and removed it. Sloane whispered, "That was private." Eleanor looked at her. "So was my marriage." Graham took the photograph from Eleanor's hand. "Stop treating her like she's the only problem." "I don't. You act like she seduced me and destroyed everything." Eleanor's eyes moved to him. "I don't think she's responsible for your choices." For the first time, Graham looked uncomfortable. Eleanor continued, "You're responsible for every message. Every hotel room, every lie, every time you came home and kissed me after being with her." Sloane lowered her eyes. Graham's voice became quieter. "You haven't been happy for a long time. That doesn't give you permission to betray me. You stopped seeing me. I was your wife, Graham. I was supposed to be able to tell you when something was wrong. You were always working. So were you. I needed someone who wanted me." Eleanor stared at him. "You had someone who loved you." The silence was so complete that they could hear the ocean through the open windows. Graham looked away first. "I can't do this anymore." Eleanor nodded slowly. "Then say it." He looked back. "Say what?" "Say that you're leaving me." Graham swallowed. "I don't know what I want." "You know enough to move another woman into our house." "I'm confused." "No," Eleanor said softly. "You're comfortable." He frowned. "With her, you're allowed to believe you're the victim. With me, you have to remember what you did." Sloane placed her glass on the counter. "Maybe we should leave." Eleanor looked at her. "You should." Graham stepped between them. "She stays." The words were simple. They were also the cruelest thing he had said all evening. Eleanor looked at him for several seconds. "Then I'm leaving." Graham seemed surprised. "You're not going to fight?" "What would I fight for? This is still our home." Eleanor walked toward the door. "No, Graham. It was our home." He followed her onto the porch. "Where are you going?" "Back to New York." "And then?" She turned. "I don't know." "You're going to make this legal?" "I haven't decided." "Eleanor?" She stopped. Graham's expression softened for the first time. "I never wanted to hurt you." She looked at him with a sadness deeper than anger. "That is what makes this so difficult to understand." "What?" "You knew you would." Then she walked down the steps. Graham remained in the doorway. Behind him, Sloane stood silently. Eleanor reached her car and opened the door. "Eleanor," Graham called. She looked back. "Don't sell the house." The sentence seemed to come from somewhere he had not intended to reveal. Eleanor stared at him. "I wasn't planning to." He exhaled, relieved. She closed the car door. But before starting the engine, she looked once more at the house. The porch light was on. Graham stood in the doorway. Sloane was behind him. For 11 years, Eleanor had believed that a home was the place where two people chose each other every day. Now she understood something else. A house could belong to you on paper and still become a place where you were no longer welcome. As she drove west, her phone vibrated. A message from Graham. "Please don't make any decisions tonight." Eleanor read it twice. Then she locked the screen. For the first time since discovering the affair, she felt something other than grief. She felt distance. And somewhere inside that distance, almost imperceptibly, a different kind of strength began to take shape. By October, Sloane had learned where Eleanor kept the good coffee. She knew which cabinet held the blue and white dishes, which drawer contained the linen napkins, and which floorboard outside the upstairs bedroom creaked when someone stepped on it after midnight. She knew the bakery in Amagansett that sold Graham's favorite sourdough, the farm stand where Eleanor used to buy peaches in August, and the small bookstore on Montauk Highway where Graham had once purchased the first edition of a novel Eleanor loved. She knew these things because she had been studying Eleanor's life, and Graham, without realizing it, was teaching her. On a Sunday morning, Sloane posted a photograph to Instagram. She stood barefoot on the deck, wrapped in an oversized cream sweater, one hand around a ceramic mug, the Atlantic behind her beneath a pale autumn sky. The caption read, "There are places that make you feel like you've finally arrived." Within 20 minutes, the photograph had hundreds of likes. Eleanor saw it while sitting in a coffee shop near Union Square. She had not searched for Sloane. She had promised herself she would stop. But social media had a cruel way of delivering the things people were trying hardest not to see. Her thumb hovered over the photograph. Then she noticed the mug. Blue ceramic. A small crack near the handle. Her mother's mug. Eleanor put down her phone. Are you all right? She looked up. Her friend Vivian Parker was sitting across from her, watching carefully. I'm fine. Vivian raised an eyebrow. You've been staring at your coffee for 5 minutes. Eleanor gave a tired smile. I saw something. Hair? Yes. Vivian leaned back. Block her. I know. So block her. Eleanor looked toward the window. She has my mother's mug. Vivian was silent. It was such a small thing. That was what made it unbearable. She shouldn't know that mug exists. Eleanor whispered. She doesn't. Graham does. Vivian understood immediately. He told her. Eleanor nodded. And the house? He tells her everything. Vivian reached across the table. Then let him. Eleanor looked at her. What? Let him give her the stories. Why? Because stories aren't the same as history. Eleanor wanted to believe that. But Graham had never been careless with history. He had always been a man who understood appearances. At charity dinners, he remembered donors' children's names. At business conferences, he knew exactly when to place a hand on someone's shoulder. He understood that people did not necessarily believe the truth. They believed the version of events that looked most convincing. And now he was building a new version of himself. A younger version. A freer version. A man who had escaped a cold marriage and found a woman who made him feel alive. That version of Graham began appearing everywhere. There were photographs from restaurants in East Hampton, weekend drives, a sailing trip, a bottle of champagne on the deck, a renovation company posting a photograph of the beach house with the caption, "Excited to bring this beautiful coastal property into its next chapter." Eleanor stared at that sentence for a long time. Next chapter. She almost laughed. The renovation had never been discussed with her. When she finally called Graham, he answered on the 4th ring. Hello? What's happening at the house? A pause. What do you mean? The renovation. Oh. You're renovating it? It needed work. It needed work when we bought it. I know. So why now? Graham exhaled. Because I'm spending more time there. With her. Eleanor. With Sloane. Yes. The word was strangely calm. She closed her eyes. How much? What? The renovation. It's not your concern. Eleanor opened her eyes. That house is mine. Graham's voice changed. It's our marital property. No. You're really going to do this? Do what? Reduce everything to paperwork. No. You did that. What does that mean? You took something that belonged to both of us emotionally, even if it belonged to me legally, and turned it into a stage for your affair. He was silent. Then he said, You don't understand. Then explain it. I needed a place where I could breathe. You had an apartment. I couldn't stay in Manhattan. Why? Because everywhere I looked, I saw the life we were pretending to have. Eleanor felt the old wound open. You weren't pretending. Graham said nothing. She continued. I wasn't pretending. I know. No. You don't. Her voice softened. I loved you. The line remained quiet. I know. He finally said. Then why are you trying so hard to erase me? I am not. You are. She heard movement on his end. Then a woman's voice. Graham? Sloane. Eleanor closed her eyes. You're there? Yes. With her? Yes. She nodded, although he could not see her. Okay, Eleanor. She ended the call. That night, Graham bought Sloane a new dining table. The old table had been made from reclaimed oak. Eleanor had found it at an antique market in Brooklyn after spending 6 weekends looking for something that felt imperfect enough to belong in a beach house. Sloane disliked it. It feels old, she said. Graham looked at the table. It is old. I want something lighter. He smiled. Then we'll change it. The next morning, the table was gone. 3 days later, Sloane posted a photograph of the new one. White oak. Minimalist. Perfectly staged. The caption read, Sometimes you have to make room for something new. Eleanor saw the photograph while reviewing a contract at her office. Her assistant, Rachel, noticed her expression. Bad news? Eleanor locked her phone. Nothing I can fix. Rachel hesitated. You want me to reschedule the client? No. Are you sure? Eleanor looked at the architectural drawings spread across her desk. A luxury hotel renovation. $40 million. People were depending on her to make decisions worth millions while her husband was spending money to replace a table she had once chosen with both hands. I'm sure. But she wasn't. Not yet. The worst part was not the table, it was what the replacement represented. Sloane was not simply living in Eleanor's house, she was slowly removing evidence that Eleanor had ever existed there. The blue curtains disappeared. The photographs were replaced. The guest bedroom became a dressing room. The old brass hooks Eleanor had installed in the hallway were replaced with black iron. Even the hydrangeas outside were cut back because Sloane thought they looked too sentimental. Each change was small. Together, they formed an erasure. Then came Thanksgiving. Eleanor spent the morning alone in Manhattan. Her sister was in California. Her father had been gone for 6 years. The city was unusually quiet. At 11, her phone buzzed. Graham. She almost ignored it. Instead, she answered. Hello. Happy Thanksgiving. She looked at the window. Happy Thanksgiving. I wish things were different. So do I. There was a pause. I'm coming back to New York next week. Why? I need to talk to you. About what? Us. Eleanor laughed quietly. There is no us. There is. You moved your girlfriend into my house. Our house. No. Eleanor, please. Do you want to know what I think? I want to know everything. I think you're trying to convince yourself that you didn't betray me because you're already living inside a version of our life where I never mattered. Graham's breathing changed. That isn't fair. Isn't it? I still love you. Eleanor closed her eyes. Those words were dangerous. Not because she believed them, because part of her still wanted to. You don't love me the way I need to be loved, she said. What does that mean? It means you want the comfort of knowing I loved you while you build a life with someone else. That isn't what I'm doing. It is. Eleanor. What? I don't want to lose you. She almost answered immediately. Instead, she waited. Then you should have been afraid before you lost me. Silence. Neither spoke. Finally, Graham said, I'll see you next week. Eleanor ended the call. Across the ocean of distance between them, Graham sat alone in the beach house that evening. Sloane was upstairs. The new dining table gleamed beneath the pendant lights. The new curtains moved gently in the sea breeze. On the wall hung a photograph of Graham and Sloane. He looked at it. For a moment, he felt victorious. He had wanted a new life. He had built one. But then his eyes moved toward the corner of the room. There, beneath the window, was a tiny scratch in the floor. Eleanor had made it 11 years earlier while moving a bookshelf. He remembered the night. She had been laughing. You said you were strong enough to carry it. I am. You're bleeding. I'll survive. She had kissed his hand. Graham looked away. He told himself it was only a scratch. But some things could not be renovated away. And for the first time, beneath all the certainty he had performed for Sloane, a quiet fear began to take shape. What if the life he was replacing was not the life he hated? What if it was the only real one he had ever had? The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning in November, delivered by a courier who stood outside Eleanor's apartment with the patience of someone accustomed to carrying other people's bad news. She signed for it without thinking. The return address belonged to Graham's attorney. Eleanor closed the door, carried the envelope to the dining table, and left it there for nearly an hour. Outside, Manhattan moved beneath a thin November rain. Taxis hissed along the avenue. Someone across the street was dragging furniture through an open window. A siren rose and faded between the buildings. Finally, Eleanor opened the envelope. Inside were 12 pages. A proposed separation agreement. She read the first page twice. Then the second. By the fourth page, she understood what Graham was trying to do. He wanted her signature on documents that would reorganize their financial assets, give him greater control over several accounts, establish his right to use the Montauk property, and formalize a separation arrangement that treated the beach house as a shared marital asset. At the bottom of the final page was a signature line. Her name. Eleanor stared at it. Then, she called Graham. He answered almost immediately. You got the documents? Yes. I wanted you to have time to review them. You mean time to sign them? That too. She walked toward the window. You want control over the investment account. We need to simplify things. You want authority over the beach house. It's where I'm living. With Sloane. Don't make this personal. Eleanor almost smiled. You moved your mistress into the house I bought before we were married. How exactly am I supposed to make this impersonal? Graham's voice hardened. I'm trying to make this clean. No. You're trying to make this convenient. Eleanor, please. She looked down at the pages. You've already decided what I get. We're separating. You decided that. We've both moved on. No. She turned another page. And this says you want me to waive any claim to reimbursement for expenses associated with the Montauk property. Graham paused. You haven't paid for the house in years. I paid for the house. With your inheritance. Yes. Which became marital property. According to who? He sighed. According to the agreement. I haven't signed anything. You signed a prenup. I signed a prenup, protecting my premarital assets. Another pause. Then Graham said quietly. You know what this is really about. What? You want leverage. Eleanor looked at the signature line again. No, Graham. I want what belongs to me. He was silent. Then he said. If you refuse to cooperate, things will become difficult. They already are. You could lose more than you think. I know. Then don't make me fight you. She closed the folder. You've been fighting me for months. That isn't fair. No, Eleanor said. What's unfair is that you think I owe you cooperation because you betrayed me. She ended the call. 3 hours later, her joint credit card stopped working. Eleanor discovered it at lunch. She was sitting at a restaurant with a client when the waiter returned with an apologetic expression. I'm sorry. The card was declined. Eleanor handed him another card. Try this one. It worked. She said nothing. But when she returned to the office, she opened her banking app. The joint credit account was frozen. Her access to one of the household investment accounts had been removed. The automatic payment for her Manhattan apartment had been transferred. A message from Graham appeared moments later. Until we have an agreement, I think it's best that we separate our finances. Eleanor read it. Then she read it again. It was almost elegant. That was what made it cruel. Graham had always been good at making control sound like reason. That evening, Vivian came over. Eleanor poured wine. Vivian watched her carefully. He cut off the card. Yes. Why? Because I wouldn't sign. Vivian started at her. He thinks you'll panic. I know. And? Eleanor sat down. I don't intend to. Vivian smiled slightly. There she is. Eleanor frowned. Who? The woman you were before him. For several seconds, Eleanor said nothing. Then she opened the drawer beside the sofa. Inside was a folder. Old. Brown. Worn at the edges. Vivian looked at it. What is that? My mother's estate. You still have it? I kept everything. Eleanor placed the folder on the coffee table. Inside were tax returns, bank statements, probate documents, the original wire transfer, and the closing statement for the Montauk property. Vivian looked at her. You think the house is yours? I don't think. Eleanor's voice was quiet. I remember. The next morning, she called an attorney. Her name was Margaret Hale. Margaret's office occupied the 22nd floor of a building near Park Avenue, overlooking a city that seemed indifferent to everyone else's disasters. Eleanor sat across from her while Margaret examined the documents. Your mother died in March of 2015? Yes. And you received the inheritance in April? Yes. When did you purchase the Montauk property? June. Before the marriage? 3 months before. Margaret looked at the closing statement. The down payment came directly from the inheritance account? Yes. And the remaining amount? A mortgage. Whose name is on the deed? Eleanor waited. Margaret turned the page. Yours. Eleanor exhaled. What does that mean? It means Graham's attorney is making an argument. Is it a good one? For him? Margaret smiled faintly. No. Eleanor leaned back. Then why is he doing this? Because pressure works? On most people? On people who believe they have no alternatives. Eleanor looked down at her hands. I used to believe that. Margaret closed the folder. Do you still? Eleanor thought about Graham standing in the doorway. About Sloane behind him. About the photograph on Instagram. About the card being declined. No. Margaret nodded. Good. She pushed the documents back toward Eleanor. Don't confront him yet. Why? Because right now, he thinks you're cornered. And I'm not. No. Margaret's voice remained calm. You're standing on ground he doesn't know exists. For the first time in months, Eleanor felt something resembling relief. Not happiness. Not victory. Just clarity. That evening, Graham called. I heard you met with a lawyer. Eleanor looked out the window. How? You're not exactly discreet. Neither are you. Eleanor, we don't need to turn this into war. You cut off my credit card, because we need boundaries. You removed my access to the account, until we settle things. You sent me documents asking me to surrender control of the beach house. I didn't ask you to surrender anything. You asked me to sign it, because we're separating, then separate. He was quiet. What does that mean? It means stop trying to control me. I am not controlling you. You cut off my money. I cut off our shared money. My name is on that account. You'll get what you're entitled to. Who decides that? He didn't answer. Eleanor smiled sadly. Exactly. Graham's voice lowered. You're making a mistake. No. You're angry. I am. You're acting emotionally. No. She looked at the folder on the table. For the first time in months, I'm acting carefully. Graham became silent. Then he said, What did your lawyer tell you? Eleanor looked at the papers. She could have told him. She could have said the words and watched his confidence disappear. Instead, she chose silence. Nothing yet. Eleanor. I'll talk to you when there's something to discuss. She ended the call. Across town, Graham sat alone in his office. He stared at his phone. He had expected anger. He had expected tears. He had expected Eleanor to call him begging for access to the account. Instead, there had been calm. That frightened him more than anything she could have said. At the beach house, Sloane was preparing for another weekend. She had ordered new outdoor furniture. She had scheduled a photographer. She had already chosen the Christmas decorations. When Graham arrived, she kissed him. You're late. I had a difficult day. She smiled. Everything okay? He looked around the room. The new furniture. The new curtains. The photographs. The house Eleanor had built slowly over 11 years. Yeah, he said. Everything's fine. But he no longer believed it. That night, Eleanor placed her mother's estate folder beside her bed. She turned off the lamp. For the first time since the affair began, she did not wonder whether Graham would come back. She wondered what would happen when he discovered that the one thing he had treated as unquestionably his had never belonged to him at all. And somewhere between those two thoughts, Eleanor finally understood the difference between being abandoned and being free. Eleanor did not tell Graham. That was the first decision she made after leaving Margaret Hale's office. She did not tell him that the Montauk property was legally hers. She did not tell him that the inheritance had been documented down to the last transfer. She did not tell him that his carefully prepared agreement had been built around an assumption that no longer held. Instead, she went home, placed Margaret's business card inside the back of her desk drawer, and continued living as though nothing had changed. It was harder than she expected. Every morning, Graham sent messages. Have you reviewed the agreement? Then, we need to settle this. Then, you're making this unnecessarily difficult. Eleanor answered none of them. Her silence unsettled him. For years, Graham had known exactly how Eleanor reacted to conflict. She explained. She reasoned. She tried to understand. Even when hurt, she had been willing to sit across from him and find a language they could both survive. Now there was nothing. No argument. No pleading. No accusation. Only silence. At first, Graham interpreted it as weakness, then as anger. Eventually, he began interpreting it as surrender. That was the mistake. By December, Sloane had almost completely stopped referring to the Montauk house as Graham's. She called it home. Are we staying home this weekend? She asked one Friday evening. Graham looked up from his laptop. Montauk? Where else? She smiled. I want to put up the Christmas tree. Graham closed the computer. Okay. I found one online. How big? 8 feet. He laughed. That's ridiculous. You'll like it. I probably will. She leaned against the kitchen counter. I was also thinking about the guest room. What about it? I don't need a guest room. Graham looked at her. You want to change it? Into an office. For you? Yes. He hesitated. That's fine. Sloane smiled. You really don't mind? No. She walked over and kissed him. Good. Graham kissed her back. Neither of them noticed the quiet arrogance inside the conversation. They were not discussing whether they could make the house theirs. They were discussing which room belonged to whom, and that difference mattered. The next weekend, they drove to Montauk in Graham's Range Rover. Sloane spent most of the drive talking about furniture. She wanted a new sofa, a larger television, heated floors in the master bathroom, a built-in wine refrigerator. Graham listened, occasionally smiling. You know, she said, we could actually live here full time. He glanced at her. You'd leave New York? Maybe. What about your job? I can work remotely 3 days a week. Graham nodded. It sounded reasonable. That was the danger. The fantasy had become practical. Sloane was no longer behaving like a mistress waiting for a married man to choose her. She was behaving like a woman who believed she had already won. On Saturday morning, she posted another photograph. The fireplace. 2 coffee cups. Graham's hand visible beside one of them. The caption read, "Home is not a place. It's the person you build it with." Eleanor saw it while sitting in her office. She stared at the photograph. Then she closed Instagram. She did not cry. That surprised her. Instead, she opened the property folder. For several minutes, she looked at the original photographs from 11 years earlier. The house before renovation, the broken deck, the old kitchen, her mother standing beside the ocean, Graham beside her, laughing. She remembered the first evening they spent there after buying it. They had slept on an air mattress because the furniture had not arrived. Rain had tapped against the windows. Graham had pulled the blanket around both of them. "We're going to make this beautiful," he had said. Eleanor had rested her head against his shoulder. "We already did." She closed the folder. Then she called Margaret. "I want to sell it." Margaret was quiet for a moment. "Are you sure?" "Yes. This isn't something you have to do." "I know. Are you doing it because of Graham?" "No." "Then why?" Eleanor looked toward the window. The city was covered in winter light. "Because I can't keep going there." Margaret understood. "You don't want the house to become part of the wound." "No." Eleanor's voice softened. "I don't want to spend the next 10 years remembering who lived there after me." "Then we'll sell it." Quietly. "Of course. And he can't know." "Not until the transaction is complete." Eleanor nodded. After the call ended, she sat alone. She expected fear. Instead, there was relief. It came quietly. Not like triumph. More like putting down something heavy after carrying it for too long. A week later, Margaret introduced her to a broker. His name was Daniel Reeves, a discreet real estate agent who specialized in high-end coastal properties. He toured the house without Graham knowing. Eleanor gave him the keys. When they arrived in Montauk, she remained in the car. Daniel walked through the property alone. When he returned, he sat beside her. "You've maintained it well. My mother used to say a house remembers how you treat it." Daniel looked at her. "Do you want to keep any furniture?" "No." "All of it?" "Yes." "Even the things with sentimental value?" Eleanor thought about it. "Especially those." Daniel nodded. "I understand." The house went on the market quietly. No public announcement. No social media. No dramatic listing photographs. Just a private circle of qualified buyers. Within 3 days, there were 2 offers. By the end of the week, there was one Eleanor could accept. She signed the preliminary documents on a gray Thursday afternoon. Her hand did not shake. That evening, Graham called. "Did you get the latest version?" "Of what?" "The agreement." "Yes. And?" "I'll have my attorney respond." He sighed. "Why are you being so difficult?" Eleanor almost laughed. "I don't think difficult means what you think it means. I've been patient." "Patient?" "Yes." "With what?" "With you." She closed her eyes. There it was. The assumption she had spent years trying not to see. Graham believed his patience was a gift. His betrayal was something she was expected to process. His new relationship was something she was expected to accept. His financial pressure was something she was expected to negotiate. And now he was offering patience as though he were the injured party. "Graham," she said quietly. "What?" "Do you remember the first time we went to Montauk?" "Of course." "You slept on an air mattress." "I remember. You said we'd never sell it." He laughed softly. "I said a lot of things." "Yes." She looked at the papers on her desk. "You did. Why are you bringing this up?" "No reason." There was a pause. Then Graham said, "We'll figure this out." Eleanor looked at the city lights. "I hope you do." The sale closed 6 days later. The money went directly into an account Graham did not know existed. Eleanor kept the closing statement in the same folder as her mother's inheritance documents. One document had brought the house into her life. The other had taken it out. Neither felt like victory. When she drove to Montauk one last time, the house was empty. Sloane had gone to Manhattan for the weekend. Graham was traveling for work. Eleanor walked through every room. She touched the walls, the kitchen counter, the staircase railing, the bedroom window. She stood on the deck and listened to the ocean. There was no anger in her now, only grief. She whispered, "I'm sorry." She wasn't speaking to Graham. She wasn't speaking to herself. She was speaking to the woman she had been when she believed love could protect a person from being replaced. Then she walked inside. On the kitchen counter, she left the keys. She took one final photograph. Not of the house. Of the ocean. The horizon was empty. For the first time, that emptiness did not frighten her. It looked like space. And space, Eleanor was beginning to understand, could become freedom. 3 days later, Sloane stood in the Montauk kitchen holding a paint catalog. She had chosen a new color for the walls. Graham was pouring coffee. "I think this one," she said. He glanced over. "Too dark. You said I could choose." "I did." "So?" He smiled. "Choose it." She smiled back. Neither of them knew. Neither of them suspected. Neither of them understood that while they were deciding what color the walls should become, Eleanor had already sold the walls themselves. And for the first time since the affair began, the future belonged entirely to someone they had both stopped seeing clearly: Eleanor. The morning Graham returned to Montauk, he was carrying a bottle of champagne. It was the kind of detail Eleanor would once have found funny. He had bought it in Manhattan after Sloane called from the train and told him she had good news. "What kind of good news?" he had asked. "You'll see." He smiled. "You're terrible at keeping secrets. I learned from you." He laughed. The exchange felt easy. That was why the morning seemed so ordinary. Graham drove east beneath a pale November sky, one hand on the wheel, the other resting near the gearshift. Sloane sat beside him wearing sunglasses despite the weak sunlight. "I still think we should spend Christmas here," she said. "We can. And New Year's. Probably. And I want to repaint the upstairs hallway." "Go ahead," she smiled. "You're finally learning." "Learning what?" "That a house needs personality." Graham laughed. "Apparently mine doesn't." "Our house," she corrected. He glanced at her. "Right." Sloane smiled. Neither of them noticed the significance of the word. When they turned onto the familiar road, Graham slowed. The house appeared ahead, except something was different. There was a white SUV in the driveway. Graham frowned. "Whose car is that?" Sloane sat upright. "I don't know." He pulled over. The front garden looked unchanged. The hydrangeas were still there. The cedar siding still caught the morning light. But the house felt strangely quiet. Graham got out. Sloane followed. He walked toward the front door. The key turned halfway, then stopped. He tried again. Nothing. He looked at Sloane. "That's strange. Maybe the lock was changed." "Why would they change the lock?" He pulled out his phone and called the local property manager. No answer. He called again. Voicemail. Sloane stepped closer. "Graham." "What?" "There's a sign." He turned. A small metal plaque had been installed near the driveway. "Private property. No trespassing." Graham stared at it. "What the hell?" Sloane looked at him. "Maybe there's a maintenance issue." "No." He walked around the side of the house. A moving truck was parked near the garage. 2 men were carrying boxes. Graham stopped. "Excuse me." One of the men looked over. "Can I help you?" "This is my house." The man blinked. "I'm sorry?" "I said this is my house." The man glanced toward the property, then toward his clipboard. "Are you Mr. Whitmore?" "Yes." He hesitated. "Then you need to contact the new owner." Graham felt the blood drain from his face. "What new owner?" The man looked uncomfortable. "I don't know, sir." Sloane stepped forward. "Who hired you?" "The buyer's moving company." Graham stared at him. "The buyer?" "Yes." There was a silence. Then Graham laughed. Not because anything was funny, because the alternative was to admit that something impossible had happened. He pulled out his phone and called Eleanor. It rang once, then went to voicemail. He called again. Nothing. He opened his messages. No new texts. His fingers moved quickly. "Where are you?" He stared at the screen. No response. He called his attorney. The call went to voicemail. Then the property manager finally called back. "Mr. Whitmore?" "Yes." "What is happening?" There was a pause. "I was told not to discuss the transaction with you." "What transaction?" "The property sale." Graham stopped breathing for a second. "What sale?" Another pause. "Mr. Whitmore, the property was sold last week." He stared at the house. No. I'm afraid so. Who sold it? The property manager did not answer. Graham already knew. He ended the call. Sloane watched him. What happened? He looked at her. She sold it. Who? Eleanor. Sloane stared. What? She sold the house. No. Yes. But she couldn't. Graham's voice was hollow. She did. Sloane shook her head. She didn't tell you? No. Maybe she didn't have the right. Graham looked toward the front door. She did. How do you know? He didn't answer. He knew because he had spent months assuming she didn't. He knew because he had treated the house as his refuge. He knew because he had believed that financial pressure would force Eleanor into cooperation. He knew because he had mistaken her silence for surrender. A man carrying a cardboard box walked past them. Excuse me, Graham said. The man stopped. When are the new owners moving in? Today. Graham closed his eyes. Today. Sloane whispered. Where are we supposed to go? He looked at her. The question sounded different now. Not romantic. Not hopeful. Practical. Where are we supposed to go? For months, Graham had believed the answer was simple. Here. He had imagined weekends. Christmas. Summer. A future. He had believed that a physical place could make the new life real. Now the house stood in front of him, unchanged and completely inaccessible. Sloane stepped closer. Call Eleanor. I did. Call again. He did. This time, she answered. Hello. Her voice was calm. Graham could barely speak. You sold it. Yes. You sold the house. Yes. Without telling me. You knew I wasn't planning to stay there. That isn't the same thing. No. Eleanor, how could you do this? There was a pause. Then she said, How could I not? Graham looked at the ocean. You knew I was living there. Yes. You knew Sloane was there. Yes. And you still sold it. Yes. His voice cracked. You could have told me. I could have. Why didn't you? Because I knew you'd try to stop me. That wasn't your decision to make. It was. No. Graham. What? You've been making decisions about my life for months. He went silent. You decided when our marriage was over, she continued. You decided another woman could live in my home. You decided I should accept it. You decided cutting off my card would make me cooperate. Her voice remained quiet. And you decided I would be too afraid to act without you. Graham closed his eyes. I was wrong. Yes. The simplicity of the answer hurt more than anger would have. How long? What? How long have you known you were going to sell it? Eleanor looked down at the closing statement on her desk. Long enough. Months? Yes. And you said nothing. I had nothing to say. You could have warned me. Why? Because we were married. Eleanor was silent. Then she said, You stopped treating me like your wife before I stopped acting like your wife. Graham looked away. Sloane was standing beside him. He could see her reflection in the window. She looked frightened. Not heartbroken. Frightened. He suddenly realized that she had never known how much of his confidence came from believing Eleanor would remain available. The house had been more than property. It had been proof. Proof that he could leave without truly losing anything. Proof that Eleanor would still be there. Proof that he could build a second life without paying the full price of destroying the first. That proof was gone. Where are you? He asked. New York. Can we talk? We're talking. Face to face. No. Eleanor. I don't think there's anything left to discuss tonight. You can't just erase everything. I didn't erase everything. She paused. I sold a house. Graham swallowed. You know what that house meant to me. Eleanor's voice became softer. I know exactly what it meant to you. What does that mean? It meant you believed you could replace one life with another and keep the first one waiting in the background. He had no answer. She continued. I couldn't let you do that to me anymore. Then the line went dead. Graham lowered the phone. Sloane looked at him. She's really gone. He stared at the house. She has been for a long time. Sloane swallowed. What happens now? Graham turned toward her. For the first time, he could not give her an answer. They stood in the driveway while strangers carried boxes through the doorway. A life was moving in. Their life was moving out. Sloane crossed her arms. Graham. What? Where are we going? He looked at the road, then at the ocean, then at the house. I don't know. She waited. You said you had everything figured out. He looked at her. I thought I did. Sloane's face changed. Did you? He had no answer. The champagne bottle remained unopened in the back of the SUV. By sunset, Graham was sitting alone in a hotel room in East Hampton. He had ordered nothing. He had turned off the television. He sat near the window, staring at the darkening ocean. His phone remained on the table. No messages from Eleanor. No photographs from Sloane. No comforting notifications. For the first time, Graham understood something he had spent months refusing to see. Eleanor had not become powerful that day. She had simply stopped asking his permission. And that frightened him more than the loss of the house. Because a man can recover from losing property. He can buy another house. He can replace furniture. He can rebuild a bank account. But once the person who loved him stops organizing her life around his choices, there is no contract he can sign to reverse it. Graham sat in the darkness. And for the first time, he wondered whether the house had never been what he was afraid of losing. Maybe it had only been the first thing he could finally see. The real loss had already happened. He had simply been too arrogant to notice. The first thing Sloane asked Graham the morning after they left Montauk was not whether he still loved Eleanor. It was where they were going to live. They were sitting across from each other in the hotel restaurant, surrounded by polished marble, soft music, and other couples eating breakfast as though the world had remained perfectly ordinary. Graham looked at his coffee. I don't know. Sloane stared at him. You don't know? I need time. She gave a short laugh. You've been saying that for months. I mean it differently now. How? He looked up. I don't have the house. Sloane's expression hardened. That house wasn't the only reason I was with you. I know. Do you? He didn't answer. She pushed her plate away. You promised me a future. I thought I could give you one. You thought? Yes. Sloane looked at him for a long time. Then she said quietly, You never actually chose me. Graham frowned. What? You chose a life without Eleanor. That isn't the same thing. No. She stood. I think that's exactly the problem. She walked away. Graham remained at the table. For months, he had imagined Sloane as the destination. Now he began to understand she had been part of the escape, and escapes rarely survive once the person running away stops believing they are being chased. Over the next few weeks, the relationship deteriorated slowly. There was no dramatic explosion, no shattered glass, no screaming match, just disappointment. Sloane stopped posting photographs. She stopped calling the beach house home. She started spending more nights at her own apartment. When Graham asked why, she said she needed space. He almost laughed at the irony. Space? Yes, you're serious? She looked at him. You taught me that word. He had no defense. One evening, she returned a set of keys. Graham looked at them in his palm. You're leaving? I think I already did. When? When you realized Eleanor could live without you. He stared at her. That has nothing to do with you. It has everything to do with me. She picked up her coat. You weren't looking for me, Graham. He looked at her. You were looking for someone who would make you feel like the man you wanted to believe you were. Then she left. Graham sat alone in the apartment. The silence felt familiar. It was the same silence that had once filled his marriage. Only now he understood its source. He had spent months blaming Eleanor for it. The realization came without drama. That was what made it unbearable. He had been the silence. He had created it. He had punished Eleanor for responding to the distance he had created himself. For the first time, Graham began remembering the beginning, not the affair. Before it, the evenings Eleanor worked late while he sat at the dining table pretending to read. The times she asked, Are we okay? And he answered, Of course. The weekends, when she wanted to talk and he said he was tired. The birthday she planned for him. The dinner he cancelled. The trip he postponed. The messages he deleted. The first lie. The second. The third. He had always called the affair a mistake. Now the word felt insulting. A mistake was forgetting an appointment. A mistake was buying the wrong ticket. What he had done required hundreds of decisions. He had chosen secrecy. He had chosen desire over loyalty. He had chosen convenience over honesty. He had chosen Sloane's admiration over Eleanor's trust. Then, when Eleanor discovered everything, he had chosen cruelty. He had moved Sloane into the house. He had cut off Eleanor's credit card. He had tried to make her sign away control. He had assumed she would eventually surrender. The affair had not destroyed his marriage. His entitlement had. 3 weeks after the house was sold, Graham went to Eleanor's office. Her receptionist looked at him with polite recognition. Mr. Whitmore, I need to see Eleanor. She's in a meeting. I'll wait. The receptionist hesitated. She may be an hour. I'll wait. He sat. An hour became 2. When Eleanor finally walked out of the conference room, she stopped. Graham stood. Hi. She looked at him. Why are you here? I wanted to see you. You could have called. I did. I know. She gestured toward an empty conference room. 5 minutes. They sat across from each other. For a moment, neither spoke. Graham looked at her. She looked different. Not physically. He could still recognize every small detail of her face. But there was no uncertainty in her anymore. No searching. No waiting for him to tell her what their life meant. He finally understood what he had lost. I've been thinking, he said. That can be dangerous. A faint smile appeared on her face. He almost smiled too. Then his expression became serious. I was wrong. Eleanor waited. I know that isn't enough. No. I know. He took a breath. I used to tell myself the affair was a mistake. She remained silent. It wasn't. Her eyes lifted. It was a series of choices. Yes. I lied to you. Yes. I lied to myself. Yes. I made you feel guilty for being hurt. Yes. I moved Sloane into your house. Yes. I cut off your card because I thought financial pressure would force you to cooperate. Yes. I tried to make you sign documents that protected me. Yes. His voice broke slightly. And I convinced myself I deserved your forgiveness before I had done anything to earn it. Eleanor looked down. For a moment, Graham thought she might cry. She didn't. I don't know what you want me to say. I want another chance. She looked up. There it is. I know. You always want another chance after the damage is done. I know. You didn't want another chance when I asked you to stop. I was selfish. You were more than selfish. He nodded. I was cruel. The word remained between them. Eleanor looked toward the window. I loved you. I know. No. She looked back at him. You don't know. He waited. I loved you enough to doubt myself. Her voice softened. I thought maybe I wasn't affectionate enough. Maybe I worked too much. Maybe I had become boring. Maybe I wasn't the woman you wanted anymore. Graham's eyes filled. I am sorry. I spent weeks thinking I had failed you. You didn't. I know that now. He nodded. Then let me help you. You can't. Why? Because you were supposed to protect me from exactly this. Graham looked down. I want to spend the rest of my life making it right. Eleanor smiled sadly. You can't spend your life repairing something you deliberately broke and expect it to become what it was. What if I don't want what it was? What do you want? You. She closed her eyes briefly. That's the problem. He looked at her. I still love you. His breath caught. She continued. Some part of me probably always will. Hope appeared in his face. Then she finished. But I don't want you back. The hope disappeared. Why? Because loving you doesn't make me trust you. I can rebuild it. Maybe. I will. You can't ask me to stand still while you do. I'll wait. You shouldn't. Why? Because waiting for me would still make your life about getting something from me. He looked at her. What am I supposed to do? Live with what you did. The words were gentle. That made them harder. Graham stood. I don't know how. Eleanor looked at him. You'll learn. He walked toward the door. Then stopped. Eleanor. Yes? If I had told you the truth when it started, would you have stayed? She thought about it. Maybe. He nodded. That answer hurt. Would you have forgiven me? Maybe. He looked at her. But you didn't give me the chance. I know. You decided for both of us. He lowered his head. Yes. Eleanor stood. That is what I need you to understand. He nodded. I do. She walked him to the door. Before leaving, Graham turned. I loved the house. I know. I thought losing it was what hurt. Eleanor waited. It wasn't. She said nothing. He looked at her. It was realizing that you sold it without needing me. Her expression softened. I didn't sell it because I didn't need you. He waited. I sold it because I needed myself. Graham nodded slowly. Then he left. Eleanor watched him disappear down the hallway. For several seconds, she remained by the door. Her heart hurt. She hated that it did. But pain was no longer proof that she had made the wrong choice. Sometimes pain was simply evidence that something had mattered. And Graham, walking alone through the winter streets of Manhattan, finally understood the difference between losing a woman and being refused by her. He had not been abandoned. He had been given exactly what his choices had earned: a life without Eleanor in it. By spring, Eleanor had stopped checking whether Graham was happy. The realization came to her one morning while she stood in the kitchen of her new apartment, watering a small lemon tree beside the window. For months, his happiness had occupied a corner of her mind. Was he alone? Was he dating someone? Did he regret what he had done? Did he miss her? Had he changed? Now, none of those questions felt urgent. The silence inside her was different. It was no longer the silence of waiting. It was peace. She had moved into the apartment 3 months after selling the Montauk house. It was smaller than the Manhattan townhouse she had once shared with Graham, but every room belonged completely to her. She had chosen the furniture herself. She had painted the walls herself. She had filled the shelves with books she had postponed reading because Graham preferred the living room to look clean. There were no photographs of a marriage to explain. No objects that needed to be negotiated. No second toothbrush beside hers. No phone she feared would light up with another woman's name. On Saturday mornings, Eleanor walked to the farmer's market. She bought flowers. She drank coffee alone. She worked. She laughed with Vivian. She occasionally cried. And she no longer apologized for any of it. One afternoon, Margaret called. Graham reached out. Eleanor stopped walking. "What does he want?" He asked whether I'd speak with you. Eleanor looked toward the street. "About what?" "He says he wants to apologize properly." "You already know what I think." "I do." There was a pause. "Do you want to hear him?" Eleanor considered the question. A year earlier, she would have said no. A month earlier, she might have said yes because she was afraid of what hearing him would awaken. Now she felt neither fear nor hope. "Yes," she said. They met at a quiet restaurant in Greenwich Village. Graham was already there. He looked older. Not dramatically. Just enough. There were gray hairs at his temples that Eleanor did not remember seeing before. He stood when she approached. "Hi. Formana." She sat. He remained standing for another moment before sitting across from her. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "Neither was I." He smiled faintly. "I've missed you." Eleanor looked at him. "I know." The waiter came. They ordered coffee. When he left, Graham folded his hands on the table. "I've spent a lot of time trying to understand why I did what I did. And? I wanted to believe it was because something was missing." Eleanor waited. "It wasn't." He looked down. "Something was missing in me." She said nothing. "I wanted admiration. Excitement. I wanted to feel young and important and wanted. And instead of admitting that to myself, I blamed you for not making me feel that way." Eleanor's expression softened. "That was unfair." "Yes. It was cruel." "Yes." He swallowed. "I thought you would always be there. That was your biggest mistake." "I know." He looked at her. "I thought your love was permanent." "It was." His eyes lifted. "What?" "My love was permanent." She paused. "But access to me wasn't." The words seemed to settle between them. Graham nodded slowly. "I deserved that." "You deserve the consequences of what you did." "I know." The waiter brought their coffee. Neither touched it. Graham took a breath. "I'm not seeing anyone." Eleanor looked at him. "I didn't ask." "I know." "Sloane? Gone. What happened?" "The fantasy ended." He smiled sadly. "I think we were both in love with what we imagined our lives would be. And when the house disappeared?" "When the house disappeared, there was nowhere left to hide the truth." Eleanor looked down. For the first time, she felt something unexpected. Pity. Not the humiliating kind. Not pity for a broken man. Pity for someone who had spent years running from himself and had finally caught up. "I forgive you," she said. Graham stopped breathing for a moment. "You do?" "Yes." He stared at her. "Does that mean—" "No." The hope in his eyes disappeared almost immediately. She continued gently. "Forgiveness isn't an invitation." "I know. I don't hate you." "I know. I don't want revenge." "I know. But I don't want to be married to you." He looked down. For a long time, neither spoke. Finally, Graham whispered, "Is there someone else?" "No." "Will there be?" "I don't know." He nodded. "I used to imagine you would find someone better." Eleanor smiled faintly. "I don't need someone better." "What do you need?" "To never again wonder whether I'm enough for someone." Graham's eyes filled. "You were always enough." She looked at him. You should have told me that before you taught me to doubt it. He lowered his head. I know. She reached across the table, not to hold his hand, just to place her fingers briefly against the table near his. A final gesture of tenderness without intimacy. I hope you have a good life, Graham. He looked at her. I hope you do too. She stood. He stood with her. For 1 second, they faced each other like two people who had once known every version of one another. Young, ambitious, in love, angry, afraid, betrayed, and finally, strangers who remembered. Graham said her name. Eleanor. She waited. I loved you. She looked at him. I know. I still do. She nodded. I know. Then she walked away. Outside, spring sunlight fell across the sidewalk. Cars moved through the intersection. People hurried toward restaurants, offices, trains. New York continued without caring that one marriage had ended. Eleanor stood on the corner for a moment. Then she smiled. Not because she had won. There was nothing left to win. She had simply stopped losing herself. Months later, Graham drove east again. He had not planned to. His car seemed to make the decision before he did. By late afternoon, he found himself on the road toward Montauk. He passed the familiar farm stands, the same gas stations, the same fields. Then he reached the road where the beach house had once stood. The house was still there, but it belonged to someone else. There were bicycles near the garage, children's toys on the lawn, a golden retriever sleeping beneath the porch. Graham slowed but did not stop. He drove past. In the rearview mirror, the house became smaller, then disappeared. He felt the grief. But this time he did not blame Eleanor for it. He understood. The house had not been stolen from him. It had never been his. Neither had Eleanor. She had loved him by choice. She had stayed by choice. She had forgiven by choice. And she had left by choice. That was what he had never understood. He had mistaken love for ownership because ownership was easier. Ownership did not require gratitude. It did not require honesty. It did not require him to wake every morning and choose the same woman again. Love did. And he had failed that choice. Not once. Hundreds of times. Every deleted message. Every hidden dinner. Every lie about where he had been. Every time he made Eleanor feel guilty for asking questions. Every time he told himself he deserved happiness without considering what his happiness would cost someone else. Every time he walked through the door of the Montauk house with Sloane while knowing exactly whose heart he was walking over. The affair had been the visible wound. The betrayal had begun long before it. That evening, Eleanor sat beside her apartment window with the lemon tree she had nearly forgotten to water. She opened her laptop. A new email waited. An invitation to speak at a women's leadership conference in Boston. She accepted. Then she closed the computer. Outside, the city lights flickered on one by one. She walked to the window. There was no ocean. No beach house. No familiar deck. And yet, she felt closer to herself than she had in years. She thought about her mother. About the old house. About Graham. About the woman she had been when she first unlocked that Montauk door. She missed her. But she no longer needed to become her again. Some chapters are not meant to be rewritten. They are meant to be understood. Eleanor had learned that forgiveness could be an ending rather than a beginning. She could forgive Graham without reopening the door. She could remember their love without returning to the marriage. She could grieve what they had been without grieving the woman she had become. And somewhere far away, Graham was learning the same lesson from the other side of the loss. He had once believed losing Eleanor would be the price of one affair. He finally understood. The affair had only been the moment the bill became visible. The real cost had been every lie that made it possible, every act of cowardice, every assumption that she would stay, every time he chose himself and expected her love to absorb the damage. He had not lost Eleanor because another woman came into his life. He had lost her because, little by little, he had made loving him impossible. And by the time he finally understood what she had been worth, she no longer needed him to understand. That was the consequence. That was the karma. And that was why it was too late.